There were 15 bulldozers lined up like tanks outside my farm's entrance, and HOA Karen was standing dead center in front of them like some kind of dictator at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Her arms were crossed, aviator sunglasses on, and she was barking orders into a walkie-talkie like she was launching an airstrike. My chickens were squawking, my goats were bolting from the fence line, and my tractor's path was blocked by a sign that read, "Property seized by HOA District Authority." I blinked twice and rubbed my eyes. It was 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. This had to be a prank. I stepped outside in my boots and flannel, coffee mug in hand, and walked toward the absurd convoy, half expecting to see a camera crew yell surprise. Instead, Karen met me halfway with a manic grin and a thick folder of papers. "You are in violation of HOA Territorial Expansion Policy 39B," she declared, flipping the folder open to a map she had clearly printed off a website made in 2003. I let out a chuckle, thinking maybe she was joking. But her bulldozers were revving like they were about to storm Normandy. I asked her who gave her the authority to trespass on my land, and she poked my chest with her finger and said, "You're not above the rules, just because you think this is your land. It belongs to the HOA now." I looked at her. Then I looked at the bulldozers. Then I took one sip of coffee, turned around, and walked back toward the house. Karen screamed behind me, "That's it, walk away, you're finished here, you'll be off this land in 2 days." I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Because while Karen thought she had staged her little coup, she had no idea who she was dealing with. And in 30 minutes, she was going to learn the hard way that I wasn't just some farmer with a pickup and a barn. I was the man who approved the land maps she didn't even bother to check. I was the one who signed the zoning permits she had just declared invalid. Because I don't just live in this county. I run it, and she was about to regret every bulldozer she rented. Back inside, I set down my mug and opened my office cabinet, pulling out a thick binder that I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the original land ownership deeds, zoning protection clauses, and a copy of the Agricultural Reserve Act I helped push through as county commissioner. I grabbed my phone and called the sheriff directly. Told him there was an active hostile trespass, heavy machinery involved, and an HOA president impersonating government authority. He said he'd be there with backup within the hour. I stepped back onto my porch, arms folded, and watched Karen strut around like she had won a war. She'd even tied yellow tape across my main gate and had a guy with a megaphone rehearsing safety announcements. She waved a laminated printout that said, "HOA expansion approved," and shouted that the land would soon become a multi-use community recreational zone, including a dog park, fitness trail, and community vegetable patch. She even mentioned that she had already sold rental permits to 3 yoga instructors. I asked her one more time to remove the bulldozers. She laughed and said, "Unless you want to be flattened, I'd suggest you start packing your crops." My neighbor Paul, an old retired Navy vet who owns the adjacent property, had wandered over to watch the chaos. He leaned over and whispered, "She doesn't know, does she?" I shook my head. Paul let out a low whistle and said, "This is going to be more fun than bingo night at the VFW." Just then, a thundering sound approached from above. Karen looked up as a sheriff's helicopter circled overhead. Her smugness flickered for a split second before she recovered and shouted, "Good, they're here to enforce the reclamation." I tried not to laugh. Minutes later, 3 county patrol SUVs rolled up, lights flashing. Deputies poured out, and the lead officer approached Karen with a file folder of his own. "Ma'am, we've received a complaint of unlawful land occupation," he said calmly. Karen raised her eyebrows and waved her laminated permit. "I am the president of the HOA. I am acting under newly adopted policies and mapped expansions. These bulldozers are entirely legal." The deputy took the paper from her, looked at it for about 3 seconds, then sighed. "Ma'am, this appears to be a printout from a community forum site, not a legal document." At that moment, one of the bulldozer operators jumped down from his cab and asked, "So, do we still get paid, or what?" Karen snapped at him to get back in formation and glared at me. You called in the sheriff? You're escalating this? I raised an eyebrow and said no. You escalated it when you brought 15 bulldozers onto county-protected farmland. Karen screamed, "That's not your call. You're not even relevant here." The deputy turned to her slowly and said, "Ma'am, he's the county commissioner. He's your boss's boss's boss." Silence fell across the field. Paul let out a long, exaggerated laugh that turned into a coughing fit. Karen's jaw dropped. Then, in a desperate attempt to recover, she spun to face me and said, "This isn't over. You might have tricked a few people with your fake titles and phony paperwork, but I know the law." I walked closer and said, "Karen, you don't even know where the county line is. You walked across it with 15 bulldozers and a stack of fake orders. And now you've got the entire county government looking directly at you." She turned red. Her fingers pointed at me like she was casting a spell. "You'll regret this. I promise you. We'll take this to the top. You'll see." I looked at the sheriff and simply said, "You might want to hold those bulldozers here for now. We may be seizing them as unregistered heavy equipment." Karen shrieked again. One of the deputies politely asked if she wanted to sit in the back of the SUV to cool off. As they led her to the vehicle for questioning, Paul shook his head in disbelief and said, "She brought bulldozers to a policy fight." I clapped him on the shoulder. "And she just declared war on the guy who writes the policies." The scene was still buzzing with tension long after Karen had been led away for questioning. Her bulldozers stood like confused sentinels, unmoving and awkward as their operators leaned against them, unsure if they were still on the clock or part of a crime scene. The deputies continued documenting everything, photographing the machinery, marking tire tracks in the dirt, and interviewing my neighbors who had gathered to watch the madness unfold. I spotted my wife Rachel walking down the gravel path from the farmhouse, her face calm but sharp-eyed as always. She was dressed casually in jeans and a flannel shirt, clipboard tucked under her arm, her hair tied back. She wasn't just my wife, she was a county judge. And she had come with more than curiosity. As she reached my side, she handed me the clipboard and whispered, "Injunction signed. Want to hand it to her sister yourself, or should I?" I looked up and saw the next chapter of this absurdity strutting onto my land like she was walking a red carpet. Karen's sister, Linda, had arrived in a silver SUV that somehow looked smug. She stepped out in heels, a tight business skirt, and a blazer far too formal for a dirt road. Her energy screamed assistant principal on a power trip. She walked straight up to one of the bulldozer operators and barked, "Resume operations. We have full authority." I intercepted her before the confused operator could even get his boots back on the ladder. "And who exactly are you?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She turned to me, eyes narrowed. "I am Linda Remington, acting HOA President in the temporary absence of my sister. This land is scheduled for conversion under Expansion Initiative 4C. Now either get out of the way or I'll have you cited for obstruction." The audacity almost made me laugh. Almost. Rachel stepped beside me, holding out the clipboard. "Linda, you're about to obstruct a standing judicial order," she said. Linda hesitated, eyes flicking between the two of us. "And who are you?" she asked with a curled lip. Rachel smiled. "County judge. The one who just signed the injunction preventing any activity or equipment operation on this land. And I suggest you read every word before you find yourself in the same SUV as your sister." Linda snatched the clipboard, scanned it with the same confidence people fake when they can't understand legal language, then handed it back. "This is a joke," she snapped. "We'll contest this." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Please do. But do it in court, not on private land. Now kindly remove yourself and the illegal machinery before we treat this like a coordinated criminal trespass." Linda tried to argue, but the momentum was gone. The bulldozer operators were openly stepping away from their vehicles, none of them willing to risk arrest for HOA drama. A few of them had already started calling their companies, and one guy was muttering something about never taking another job without seeing a real permit again. Paul strolled up again, eating sunflower seeds and watching Linda with the kind of interest most people reserve for courtroom dramas. "You folks sure know how to spice up a Tuesday," he said around a mouthful. Linda ignored him, marching back to her SUV while furiously tapping her phone. As she peeled away down the road, Rachel sighed and turned to me. "Do you think they're actually dumb enough to come back?" I looked at the equipment still lined up like a failed parade and nodded. With that much entitlement, they might just be. We headed back inside, and I sat down to call the zoning board. It didn't take long to get them involved, especially when I told them that Karen had forged a new map showing the HOA boundary consuming over 200 acres of land, none of which was under their control. I had the real zoning maps on file from when the land was officially surveyed just 2 years ago. The zoning director, David, promised to pull the public land records and send an investigator the next morning. I also contacted the agricultural office to report attempted disturbance of protected soil. This wasn't just a land dispute anymore. Karen and her board had violated county zoning boundaries, faked legal documents, and deployed heavy machinery to a reserve farm. The penalties were going to be severe, and I was going to make sure of it. Later that afternoon, I received an unexpected email from a local journalist. Apparently, Karen had contacted the media first, pitching a dramatic story about a rogue farmer blocking community development with threats of violence and anti-progress sentiment. The journalist wanted my side. I invited her to the farm. When she arrived, I handed her copies of my land deeds, the zoning maps, and a video clip from one of my trail cams that showed Karen removing boundary markers and hammering in new ones while wearing a hard hat. The journalist's eyes widened as she scrolled through the footage. She asked if she could use the material for her piece. I said yes, on the condition she told the full story, not just Karen's HOA sob story. She agreed. As evening settled in, the farm returned to its usual peace. The smell of hay and soil replaced the oily stench of diesel, and the animals gradually calmed. But I knew it wasn't over. People like Karen didn't go down easy. I sat on the porch with Rachel and Paul, sipping lemonade while watching the sun set behind the pasture. Paul was recounting a story from his Navy days about a captain who once tried to seize control of a port using nothing but bluffs and attitude. "Reminds me of your HOA gal," he said. "All noise and no maps." I nodded. She thought she had a claim because she said she did. Never checked the records, never filed the right forms. Just steamrolled ahead, literally. The next morning, as promised, a zoning investigator named Harold arrived. He was an older man, calm and methodical. I walked him through the property lines, showed him the original survey, the new fake one, and the bulldozer placements. He nodded, took notes, and muttered a lot of legal terms under his breath. When he finished, he looked up and said, "This is going to be fun." He promised a full report to the County Development Office and potential charges filed for fraudulent documentation. Before he left, he asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint against the HOA. I told him not yet. Let's wait and see what they do next. Because I had a feeling Karen wasn't done embarrassing herself. And when she came back, I wanted every camera rolling. It didn't take long. Just 3 days after her initial humiliation and detainment, Karen returned, and this time she didn't come quietly. She rolled up in a black SUV with tinted windows, flanked by a man in a suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Her heels clicked loudly on the gravel as she stepped out like a B-movie villain, and her lawyer, who I guessed she hired in haste, followed behind, clutching a leather briefcase and wearing the expression of someone trying to walk carefully through a minefield. She wore a smug smile like armor and held a folder with enough papers to wallpaper a barn. She marched straight up to the boundary where the county had placed fresh signage marking my land as off-limits and held the folder high as if it were the 10 Commandments. "I demand reinstatement of development rights and immediate removal of the illegal obstruction signage placed by your office." She pointed directly at me like I was the head of some insurgent operation instead of the actual county commissioner. I didn't flinch. I just stepped forward slowly, holding a folder of my own, and stopped a few feet from her. The sheriff's deputy assigned to this area stood nearby, arms crossed, ready to step in if she got too bold again. Her lawyer opened his briefcase and began spouting vague legal threats about misuse of power, obstruction of community development, and constitutional violations. I let him talk. When he paused to take a breath, I opened my folder and handed him a stack of documents. He scanned them, flipping through quickly at first, then slower. Then his face changed. He stopped flipping. His fingers hovered midair like he just realized he was holding a live wire. Karen noticed. What's wrong?" she hissed. The lawyer turned to her and whispered something. She ignored him. "Say it louder. Say it in front of him. I want him to hear." The lawyer straightened his tie and said softly, This might be a problem." Karen's eyes narrowed. "What kind of problem?" I answered for him. "The kind that shows your entire operation was illegal from the moment it started." I handed her another paper, footage stills from my trail cam that clearly captured her ripping out boundary markers and replacing them with ones she had made, along with the original time-stamped records of the markers' placement from the zoning department. She scoffed and waved them away, pretending like it was a minor issue. But the lawyer didn't scoff. He closed his briefcase slowly and turned to her again. "Karen, I strongly suggest we take this opportunity to resolve this without further escalation." She erupted. "You're supposed to be defending me, not folding like a lawn chair." She spun to face me again. "You can't win this. I've got the support of the board. I've got community momentum. And when people hear how you're blocking recreational access and expansion, they'll turn on you." I didn't smile. I just stepped to the side and waved my hand toward the gate, where 3 local news vans had pulled up and begun setting up cameras. The reporter I had spoken with earlier was there with her crew, and now she had more than just a few clips. Karen froze. Her lawyer visibly paled. The reporter began filming. I turned back to Karen and said, "You want public attention? You got it. Let's show them everything. Your maps, your fake permits, your bulldozers parked on agricultural reserve land. And let's not forget your attempt to override zoning law with a laminated brochure." Karen's eyes darted from camera to camera. The lawyer leaned in one last time and whispered something, probably begging her to leave. Instead, she stormed toward the cameras. She raised her voice for drama, launching into a speech about land hoarding, out-of-touch officials, and unfair obstacles to community growth. But every claim she made, I calmly refuted with documentation. Every accusation was answered with facts, dates, and video proof. At one point, she claimed I had only lived in the county for 5 years. I held up my birth certificate, issued at the very hospital 20 miles away. The reporter didn't even have to work hard. Karen was doing half the job herself. And when she brought up infrastructure access, I dropped the final bombshell. I pulled out a separate folder labeled Land Infrastructure Easement Agreement. And with a few clear pages, I showed the press, and Karen, that I wasn't just the legal owner of the farm. My family's land holdings included over 60% of the ground beneath the HOA's roads, power conduits, and irrigation systems. The land their homes, parks, and clubhouse physically relied on. "You see," I said calmly, "all that was grandfathered into use agreements from the 1970s. But those agreements are up for renewal. And after this week's events, I've chosen not to renew them." Karen's mouth opened but no words came out. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to lie down in the road. The reporter asked, "Just to clarify, without your renewal, they lose what?" I answered plainly. "Water access, electrical access, road access to 2/3 of their entrances and exit. They built on my infrastructure, and now I'm cutting the cord." Karen lunged forward, yelling about blackmail and abuse of power. The deputy stepped in, blocking her path, and told her to calm down. Her voice cracked as she yelled about conspiracy, accusing me of being a corrupt land baron. And then she knocked the camera with her hand. That was the final straw. The deputy immediately detained her for interference with a journalist. Her lawyer didn't even try to stop it. Instead, he walked up to me, apologized under his breath, and handed me his business card. "If she fires me, let me know. I'd rather work with you than against you." The sheriff's vehicle pulled away with Karen once again in the back seat, this time less defiant and more dazed. The reporter turned to me and asked for a final comment. I looked toward the bulldozers still parked awkwardly on my land and said, "Some people think loud engines and louder voices make them powerful. But the real power lives in quiet paperwork, steady hands, and knowing where the real lines are drawn." As the camera shut off, I could hear murmurs of laughter and disbelief from the crew. They'd never seen anything like this. I wasn't surprised. Karen had tried to bulldoze her way through law, land, and logic. But she brought the wrong fight to the wrong man. And I was just getting started. The silence that followed Karen's second public meltdown was louder than any argument she had made. Her absence became more powerful than her presence ever was. HOA members began whispering behind closed doors, then openly asking questions, and then finally demanding answers. The video of her chaotic press confrontation spread fast. News outlets, social media pages, and even local schools were sharing the footage like wildfire. The part where she slapped the reporter's camera and screamed about land hoarders had already become a meme. But what really hit home was the moment the journalist asked me what I owned, and I replied by calmly listing all the infrastructure their HOA used without knowing they didn't actually own the land underneath. That clip made them panic, because they realized that all the roads they drove on, the clubhouse they hosted events in, and the power lines supplying their streetlights relied on my goodwill. And that goodwill had officially run out. The first real blowback came during an emergency HOA board meeting that was scheduled hastily and attended poorly. Karen was obviously absent, and Linda tried to take control again, but this time the room turned against her. Residents demanded to know why their HOA dues had been used to rent bulldozers, hire a lawyer from out of state, and create fake legal documents that had now led to a criminal investigation. One man stood up and asked where the money for the bulldozers had come from. Linda hesitated, then claimed it came from a discretionary beautification fund. That made everyone erupt. "Beautification fund," one woman shouted. "You call invading a protected farm with construction vehicles beautification?" Someone else yelled that they wanted an audit. That one word rippled across the room like a spark in dry grass. Audit. That was when the residents truly began to revolt. I heard about all of this through a neighbor who sat on the edge of both the farm and the HOA boundary. He kept me informed like a loyal reporter, only stopping by long enough to drink a cup of coffee and unload the latest gossip. He told me that a group of residents were petitioning to remove the entire HOA board and appoint temporary overseers until the county could help transition them out of their current agreement. Apparently, I had become something of a legend overnight, with neighbors calling me the zoning sheriff and the land whisperer. I didn't care much for titles, but I appreciated that people were beginning to understand that ownership meant more than just property lines. It meant responsibility. And Karen had trampled all over that. But she wasn't done yet. Somehow, despite the chaos, the lawsuits, and the press embarrassment, she decided to push forward with one last desperate stunt. She filed a lawsuit against the county itself. Her complaint alleged that the county had violated her HOA's right to development and unfairly targeted her due to personal animosity. She listed herself as the lead plaintiff and me, personally, as the named offender. She accused me of using my position to wage a vendetta and of misusing public office for personal revenge. Her lawyer, unsurprisingly, was no longer the man from before. This one was a slick, young attorney who clearly thought he was walking into a small-town squabble he could win with confidence and city boy swagger. The lawsuit was filed in the local court, which meant it came across the desk of my wife, who recused herself immediately to avoid conflict of interest. But the new judge assigned was no friend of Karen's either. He was a lifelong county resident who had overseen dozens of zoning cases and had a strong dislike for people who thought laminated papers and loud voices counted as legal precedent. When the court date came, Karen arrived in a blazer too large for her, with an entourage of exactly one, the new lawyer who looked nervous within minutes. I sat across from them, calm, composed, and flanked by the county's legal team. I didn't have to say much. The documentation spoke for itself. Her lawsuit was riddled with inaccuracies, false citations, and bold claims backed by no evidence. At one point, she tried to claim that her HOA had been operating with expanded authority since 2020. The zoning board provided maps showing no such change had ever been approved. She claimed I had a personal grudge against her. The county produced records showing I hadn't even had a conversation with her until the day she deployed the bulldozers. Her lawyer visibly wilted during the second hour of proceedings, and by the end of the day, the judge dismissed the entire suit with prejudice and announced that counterclaims could now be pursued if the county desired. Karen looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. It didn't end there. The county, with the zoning board's recommendation, moved to file charges of fraudulent activity, trespassing, environmental damage, and unauthorized land use against Karen and the HOA. The bulldozers were officially impounded and listed as evidence. Meanwhile, I filed to have their unrenewed infrastructure easement formally dissolved. That meant within weeks, unless the HOA reached out to negotiate proper legal access, their water and road rights would legally be stripped. At first, they bluffed. Then they begged. I gave them two options: either pay the new easement fees and publicly apologize, or transition the HOA into a voluntary neighborhood association with no governing power and limited land claims. They chose the latter. Karen didn't appear at the final vote. Her name was removed from all HOA documents, and a new team was brought in to dismantle what she had built. To add insult to injury, I received formal approval to host a public auction of all equipment that had been left abandoned on my land for more than 2 weeks, including the bulldozers. With proper legal documentation, we advertised the event as a county fundraiser. Hundreds showed up. The auction turned into a community celebration. Families arrived with kids, local bands played in the background, and one of the bulldozers was bought by a nearby children's museum to be turned into a play structure. It was poetic. The machines that were meant to flatten my farm were now part of a learning exhibit titled Know Your Land. I stood quietly during the event, watching people laugh and share stories, grateful that something positive had grown out of such a ridiculous and frustrating ordeal. I didn't need to make a speech. I didn't need to gloat. The bulldozers were gone, the lawsuits dismissed, and the power Karen once clung to had crumbled completely. And as I looked over the crowd, I realized something else. The fight wasn't just about land. It was about reminding people that just because someone acts like they're in charge doesn't mean they are. Real authority comes with duty. And it doesn't drive a bulldozer. The dust had settled, literally and figuratively. The bulldozers were gone, auctioned off to new homes where they'd never again be used as weapons in a suburban land grab. The HOA was in pieces, its former leadership either removed or disgraced, and its residents had begun to rebuild their community with a newfound sense of humility. Yet even after all of that, Karen wasn't done. She had disappeared from public view, but not from people's minds. Rumors swirled that she was still planning something, that she had one final card to play. Most ignored it, chalking it up to drama-fatigued neighbors looking for the next scandal. But I knew better. People like Karen don't go away quietly. They wait, they plot, and then they try to strike when they think no one's watching. So it didn't surprise me when, 3 weeks later, she showed up again, this time crashing a live-streamed county meeting. We had been discussing plans for a new public park on the eastern side of the county, well outside HOA territory, when she barged into the back of the room with a camera crew of her own. She was visibly thinner, her blazer wrinkled and makeup overdone, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. She marched straight down the aisle, ignoring the startled expressions around her, and stopped in front of the podium just as one of the commissioners was speaking. Her voice cut through the chamber like a knife. "I will not be silenced. This is a government run by bullies and cowards, and the people deserve to know the truth." Security approached, but the mayor, who was chairing the meeting, held up a hand. "Let her speak," he said quietly. "We all knew this was her last stand, and maybe we needed to let her implode one last time in public, once and for all." Karen seized the microphone and began ranting about land monopolies, systemic abuse of authority, and how she had uncovered a secret conspiracy that the county was hiding land records to suppress private development. She accused me of rigging elections, forging property maps, and even claimed I was funneling taxpayer money into secret projects on my farm. Her voice cracked from the strain, but she kept going, not noticing the wave of disbelief washing over the room. It was surreal. Even her former supporters, a few of whom had shown up out of curiosity, stared at her like she was a stranger. When she tried to connect the new park development to her failed HOA expansion, claiming it was a revenge tactic to block her dream of a community utopia, the mayor finally stepped in. He asked her to provide evidence. She waved a tablet in the air, screaming about data and secret emails. But when the mayor asked her to hand it over, she refused and accused him of being in on the cover-up. Security escorted her out after that, and the meeting resumed. But not before every news outlet and social media page had captured the entire meltdown. Within hours, the video was everywhere. Karen had gone from controversial figure to full-blown public spectacle. I received dozens of calls that evening. Reporters, citizens, even distant relatives who'd seen the video and wanted to know what was really going on. I gave the same calm response to each one. Karen's claims are false, and her actions are under ongoing legal review. That was it. No emotion, no personal attack. Because at that point, Karen had stopped being a threat. She had become a warning. A cautionary tale about what happens when entitlement meets authority and neither has a firm grip on reality. A few days later, the sheriff's office confirmed that she was being formally charged with disruption of a government meeting, tampering with public records, and misuse of private security personnel, stemming from her earlier bulldozer debacle. Her trial was scheduled for the fall, and from the looks of it, she wouldn't have many allies left. With Karen out of the picture, I turned my focus back to the community. We launched a new initiative called Know Your Land, a free workshop series that helped residents understand zoning, easements, and property rights. The response was overwhelming. People from all over the county signed up, and it became more than just a legal education program. It became a way to heal, to rebuild trust in the system and in one another. We held the first event right at the edge of my farm, near the spot where the bulldozers had once been parked. Now there was a small public garden there, with benches and flower beds maintained by volunteers. Children played where confrontation once ruled, and older residents shared coffee while learning how to read boundary map. The highlight of the workshop series came when I invited guest speakers. Attorneys, planners, even former HOA leaders who had learned their lesson and wanted to speak openly about the dangers of unchecked authority. People asked honest questions, laughed together, and for the first time in a long time, no one was afraid of fences or fake violations. My wife Rachel even taught a few sessions on basic legal protections for property owners, and Paul, my retired Navy neighbor, gave an impromptu lecture on spotting shady characters in leadership roles. He got a standing ovation, mostly for his jokes and not so subtle jabs at laminated permits. One afternoon, while organizing materials for the next session, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. I opened it and found a single handwritten page. It was from Karen. The handwriting was shaky and the tone was nothing like I expected. She didn't exactly apologize, but she acknowledged that things had spiraled, that she had let pride blind her, and that she never realized how little she truly understood about the laws she tried to enforce. She wrote that she wouldn't be returning to the county, and she didn't ask for forgiveness, just understanding. I stared at the letter for a long while before pinning it up on the barn wall, beside the framed photo of the 15 bulldozers lined up in front of my gate. Below it, I placed a wooden sign, hand-carved by a local craftsman, that read, "Never start a war with the man who draws the map." People chuckled when they saw it, but the message wasn't just for laughs. It was a reminder. A reminder that power without knowledge is dangerous, that titles mean nothing without truth, and that the loudest person in the room is often the one most afraid of being wrong. The county had weathered the storm, and the land was quiet again. Not empty, just at peace. And as I walked the property one last time that evening, watching the sun dip behind the trees, I felt something I hadn't in a long while. Not pride. Not relief. Just a deep, simple sense of gratitude that the truth had held. And that sometimes the land really does defend itself, so long as the right hands are holding the line.